involved in your municipal inventory. I haven't read the report in detail, but I did skim through it, and it's really looks like some outstanding work. So as soon as I have those totals, I'll update the report and certainly get Travis and Wendy an updated copy that shows Sonoma's solid waste by year. So this just shows you specific to Sonoma what the percent change has been, again, from 1990 to 2018. Big drop in building energy, and we attribute that primarily to Sonoma Clean Power. And your city, of course, has been a leader in moving to Sonoma Clean Power, both to the Evergreen service and community-wide. Transportation, you see the increase for Sonoma, and then water and wastewater, also a very, very strong decrease in emissions. And so overall, your total emissions have increased by 1% between 1990 and 2018. And I think you can really attribute that to the transportation emissions increasing. Then looking back at our targets for a moment, this is kind of taking us back up to the countywide numbers. And so you can see where we started in 1990, which is considered our baseline for evaluating progress. And then the 2010 and 2018 inventory updates, which are shown in red. And then the purple line shows the trajectory that we need to follow if we're to meet the existing targets in the 2020 and beyond plan. So a pretty steep drop that we need to achieve between now and 2050. So now I'll go into a little bit of detail about each of the sectors. So looking at transportation emissions, and these will look primarily at the change from 2015 to 2018. So first wanted to just describe the makeup of our transportation emissions. And so we break them into now 3 categories. So there's the on-road transportation, which is your, basically the vehicles that travel on our roads, the cars, light trucks, freight trucks, basically anything that travels on our roadways. And that's the majority of our on-road emissions. And then we have the off-road emissions, which are, airport support ground equipment, lawn mowers, lawn and garden equipment, ATVs. So those motorized contraptions that aren't running on our roads, basically. And that's a pretty small percent of our total, roughly 7.2%. And then new this year, new for the 2018 inventory, we're also including emissions from SMART, which, as you can see, is a very small percentage of the total. And we'll continue reporting on SMART in inventories going forward. And then this chart shows you the emissions by jurisdiction. And we did see in a couple of jurisdictions, the city of Santa Rosa and I believe Healdsburg have seen a decline in emissions in transportation, but all other jurisdictions saw some form of an increase, not too large in most cases. And this is an area that we want to do some more investigation into. We have the recently released travel behavior study that the Sonoma County Transportation Authority released, and we'd like to look at the data. It has a lot of vehicle miles traveled data, kind of origin and destination, so showing the VMT between major like shopping centers, and I think there's some winery data in there. So we want to look into that in more detail to try and understand some of these patterns that we're seeing, and also really most importantly to identify areas that we can look to reduce VMT, either through transit improvements or bike ped improvements. So that's kind of one of the next steps with this data. I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes talking about what we are doing countywide, and in some cases led by the SCTA and Rcpa to tackle the transportation emissions. So in 2018, we released a plan called the Shift Sonoma County Low Carbon Transportation Action Plan. And it basically has goals to reduce VMT, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, of course, reduce travel expenses or transportation costs, and also create a healthier and safer transportation network. And so it is separated into 2 major strategies, one mode shift, which you see on this slide, and then a second, which is related to fuel shift, and I'll share that slide in a moment. But this shows you the mode shift goals for 2040. And so, for example, the bike share project that SCTA is working on with Marin County and our various jurisdictions along the 101 corridor is an example of a project that was kind of born out of this plan as a way to increase access to biking and pedestrian access. So this is an area that we need to continue to work on. And just a note back to the travel behavior study, one of the key findings of the study is that about 60% of our trips on average across Sonoma County are less than 5 miles in length. And so that indicates that we do have an opportunity to shift more of our trips from the single occupancy vehicles to other modes. And that's something that we need to continue working on. And then in terms of fuel shift, this is where we focus on really changing out our fossil fuel-based transportation system to electric. And so the goal in this area is to reduce countywide petroleum use by 50%. And that has a stretch goal of increasing the number of EVs on our roads to 100,000 by 2030. And this chart here on the right shows you that in 2018, we were just, I think, over 8,000 EVs and plug-in hybrids, and we need to obviously get to 100,000. And then this is just a straight line projection if we continue along at the current pace. Another important aspect of this strategy is to find ways to increase access to EVs in low-income communities, and also to continue working with our jurisdictions to change out their fleets to be EVs from fossil fuel-based. And of course, charging stations, which I understand is an issue in the Sonoma Valley in terms of having enough charging stations to support the move to EVs. And you can read more about the plan at the link on these slides, which I will send to you after the presentation. So now I'd like to move on to building energy emissions. And so here again is the chart showing emissions between 2010 and 2018 by jurisdiction. And so you can see where Sonoma stands. And the pattern here is pretty consistent, although I'm not sure what happened in Windsor between 2015 and 2018, something that I'd like to look into a bit more. But for all of our other jurisdictions, we did see either a slight or a pretty dramatic decline, like in the case of Santa Rosa. Sonoma's seen a good decline in building energy emissions. And so that's a very good sign, and we'd like to see that continue. So looking in this a little bit more in more depth, one of the things that we took a look at this time is the building energy emissions by source. And so the chart on the left shows basically how much of our emissions are from electricity versus natural gas. And as our electricity supply has gotten cleaner, both through Sonoma Clean Power and PG&E's electricity mix has also gotten cleaner over time, the emissions from our natural gas use have become a bigger percentage of our total emissions. And so the key message here is that we really now need to work on moving off of natural gas to clean electricity so that we can reduce those emissions as well. And so the opportunities on the electricity side would be to continue increasing the percentage of accounts that are on Evergreen. And then natural gas also would be moving to electricity. And just some notes on natural gas, besides the large percentage of emissions, it also has some health and safety impacts that are of concern. And so there's numerous reasons to transition away from natural gas. And then finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we really, as kind of a foundation to our work, is to focus on energy efficiency. It's really the low-hanging fruit. And the more we can reduce our energy usage to begin with, the less alternatives we need to put into place. And so it's an area that we want to continue to work on with our cities and the county. So the last sector I want to talk about in a little bit of detail is the solid waste emissions. So I mentioned earlier that we don't yet have the breakdown by jurisdiction, but we do have it, the total number. And so here on the left, you can see the emissions in 2015 and then 2018. You see a big increase in 2018. And that is really due to the disaster debris. So that's the orange segment of the bar on the right-hand side. So of the total 858,000 tons, only 30% of that was municipal solid waste. So, trash from residences and commercial businesses. And then the bulk of it was really the disaster debris from the 2017 wildfires. And that debris is primarily ash, which is an inert material, does not have organics that decompose in a landfill and produce emissions. And so even though the total tonnage increased significantly, we don't see a huge increase in the emissions from that tonnage. Now, that's not to say that when all those materials were burned in 2017, that of course produced a huge amount of emissions, but we didn't include that in the 2018 inventory. So bottom line, our emissions were about 204,000 metric tons. CO2 equivalents, which is a decrease of 7% from 2015. Also new this year, we worked with our partners at Zero Waste Sonoma. They use a model called the WARM model, and it allows them to basically calculate the impact or the benefit of the diversion practices that they've been working on. So the recycling, composting, and other reuse practices that keep those materials out of our landfill. So using the WARM model, they calculated that we actually avoided about 303 1,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent in emissions. And that's not directly comparable to our emissions number because it's a life cycle assessment. So our assessment looks at a point in time, the Rcpa inventory, whereas this life cycle really looks at the entire life of the material from the emissions produced by mining the metal that goes into the cans, to the transportation, to the ultimate disposal. And so it's a different number that this more model calculates, but it does give us a sense for the benefit and the value of continuing and expanding these practices. So I mentioned the wildfires, and I just thought you might be interested in these estimates from the California Air Resources Board, and this is across California, a recent study, preliminary estimates of the CO2 emissions from wildfires. So our fires were here in this 2017 and then 2019 with the Kincaid fire. So you can see across California the huge impact in terms of emissions from those wildfires. I'm not aware of any work that's been done to separate out the emissions from the wildfires that took place in our area in 2017 or 2019, but I imagine that will be something that will be looked at over time. So now I'd like to take just a few minutes and talk about a consumption-based inventory. We got a fair amount of feedback when we were preparing this inventory, interest from community members in understanding the impacts of our consumption on our emissions. And so we actually looked to a study that was done by the Cool Climate Network, and I have the references in the slide, out of UC Berkeley, to estimate consumption-based emissions. And the circles in the middle of the slide here attempt to show the difference between what they refer to as sector-based emissions, which is really an activity-based inventory, which is what Rcpa does, versus the consumption-based inventory, which is that larger circle on the right. And it shows you that there's some overlap between the two. And so a consumption inventory basically looks at all of the goods and services that we use or consume within our cities and the county, and then attributes all of the emissions related to the production and distribution of those material or those goods and services to us as the end consumer, versus a sector or activity-based inventory, which really just looks at the energy and the emissions that we're producing within our geographic boundary. So it's a smaller slice of the totals. And so the Cool Climate Network looked at data for 2015, and they estimated that our consumption-based inventory was 7.2 million metric tons CO2 equivalent versus our sector-based or activity-based inventory of 3.44 million. So you can see there is a sizable difference between the two, and we think it's important to recognize and understand the differences and the impact of our consumption habits or patterns, and then look to ways that we can both as individuals and then as a community reduce those emissions. And so this slide just gives you a bit more detail in terms of how that breaks down by city, by county and city. And so Sonoma County is here on the right, and they've also estimated in the different categories of consumer goods. And there's Sonoma there, kind of in the middle of the list. And then a further breakdown in terms of, what does that look like within each of the pillars? And so you can see transportation continues to be a big piece of the puzzle in terms of the fuel that we can, put into our vehicles, the air travel that we do, and then looks at the kind of building and waste-related energy. Our food has a big impact, the other goods and services that we consume, and then again here the benefit of the composting and the recycling, which actually helps reduce our emissions from a consumption perspective. So then this organization called C40 did an interesting study where they looked at consumption patterns across their large cities that are members of this organization, and then tried to identify areas or ways to reduce those consumption emissions. And so this slide and the next just show for two sectors, buildings and infrastructure, and the next one is on food. What are some of the actions that could be taken to reduce emissions in these areas? And these are actually actions that local governments might have a role in, or state or federal governments. So for example, enhancing building utilization. So rather than tearing down a building and building something new, can we reuse a building or repurpose a building? Can we set requirements for using lower carbon cement in buildings and reusing building components? And so they looked at two levels of intervention, kind of they called it progressive consumption and then ambitious. and the amount of emissions that could be saved in each of those sets of strategies. And then here is the same approach taken for food. So dietary change, what we eat and where we purchase our food from has an impact in terms of emissions, looking at reducing household and supply chain waste. And then again, kind of the moderate interventions and then the more ambitious interventions. So I'd highly recommend this report if you haven't already looked at it. Has some really good information about consumption-based emissions. So that kind of concludes my inventory part of the update. And now I'd like to just spend a couple minutes and talk about what's next and what the Rcpa is working on with our cities and the county. Excuse me. So one of the questions that's come up, since our inventory is looking backwards to 2018, and you probably heard this from David and Tom in working on the municipal inventory, the reason we're a little bit behind in our inventory is that we don't have all of the data available to us to do the inventory like for 2019. So we do the most recent year that we can. So we're trying to forecast and think about, how might our 2020 emissions be impacted by COVID, for example. And what I'm showing on this slide is a data set from Streetlight Data, and they use cell phones, GPS data to basically aggregate and make estimates of travel patterns. And you can actually go to their website, which is linked on this slide, to look at the VMT patterns during the COVID timeframe. And this, probably is a very intuitive slide in that in March, we saw a big drop off in our VMT in Sonoma County, and then it started inching back up. And I just updated this today with July's data. So we're kind of hovering, we were 42% below our January average in June, and now 34% below in July. So we'll watch this and see how that VMT changes. But one of the key questions is, to what extent will we maintain this lower VMT? How many people will continue working from home? How long will we continue to have meetings like this one where you don't have to travel to a meeting? When will people really start going back to the office if they do? And then how does that change our travel patterns? So we may see a pretty substantial decrease in our emissions this year, or we may not. It just really depends on how things play out for the rest of the year. So this is one of the open questions we have that we'll be keeping an eye on. So in terms of the Rcpa priorities, looking ahead and based on this data, we've organized our work into a couple major categories that are outlined in our strategic plan. And so we have a lot of work going on around decarbonization. We're very active in the BayREN, the Bay Area Renewable Energy Network, and we're leading the charge on the new Water Upgrade Save program, which you'll hear more about in the future. We're working on a CEC grant to implement the EV goals in the SHIFT plan, doing some work with Sonoma Clean Power on their Lead Locally program, contributing to the Go Sonoma transportation measure, and then SHIFT Sonoma County. On the sequestration side, we want to kind of restart some discussions that were happening earlier in the year between the major players in the open space and ag community to look at how we can increase sequestration. On the resilience side, we are planning to host an Urban Land Institute Resilience Advisory Panel. Now it's probably going to be virtual. It was supposed to happen live in March and then got postponed because of COVID. But we're expecting this panel to make some good recommendations to us in terms of increasing our resiliency. And then we have some planning and data activities. And it's the last one, the 2030 Climate Emergency Mobilization Strategy, that I'd like to say just a few words about before I conclude. So our board of directors in September of 2019 adopted a climate emergency resolution. And I believe the city of Sonoma, you just adopted yours back in June, I think, if I remember correctly, which is fantastic. And so in the Rcpa resolution, our board directed us to develop a 2030 climate emergency mobilization strategy, which basically is to take the good work that's been done with the Climate Action 2020 and Beyond plan and now look at, okay, how do we get from where we are now to 2030? So we're just beginning that process, and we have identified a number of strategies in the different kind of major initiative areas on the left-hand side. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about these. I don't want to take too much of your time here this evening, but you can see that we're looking at strategies across the different sectors. I will say on the building energy side, one of the major areas of focus will be really decarbonizing our existing building stock. cities are doing work around REACH codes for new construction and all electric construction, but we have such a huge existing building stock that we really need to address. And so that's going to be one of the challenging and very important parts of this overall strategy. Transportation, one thing you don't see listed here, but it will be added, I believe, is a focus on transit. So we've got, here the EV access for all, so expanding electric vehicles, improving biking and walking in Sonoma County, a VMT bank so that projects could, when they're trying to mitigate their VMT impacts, if they can't mitigate them on site, then they could pay into this bank that hasn't been developed yet, but that's the idea. And it could fund larger transportation projects that would have more of a GHG reduction impact. So transit is something that's come up as we've shared the strategy with folks that really needs to be an important part of the overall approach. So in terms of our next steps with this strategy, we have been sharing it with various committees and stakeholders beginning in late June, and we anticipate that going on through the end of August. We met with our board earlier this week and made a presentation and got their comments. And then we intend to form some kind of working groups to actually kind of put more detail behind each of the strategies and start to estimate, what are the reduction potential of each of these strategies? How would we implement these strategies? Roughly how much would it cost? And so to be able to take an updated final version of the strategy to our board in December for their review and approval. And then the really hard part is figuring out how do we fund this work, because we're all kind of operating on a shoestring, don't have the resources that we need to really take action on this plan. And so we need to figure out what are the funding opportunities and take that to our board for approval in April. So that's the high level view of the strategy, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have either about the inventory or about our next steps. So thank you. Yes, David.
Thank you for an excellent presentation. Very, very provocative and useful. I wanted to focus specifically on the carbon sequestration arena in your last set of slides, and offer that you be sure to be in touch with your team with the Sonoma Ecology Center that has a major effort in biochar and lots of work going on. We're also coordinating with the Climate Center in Santa Rosa and their work in sequestration and movement toward reduced carbon in the soil, basically. So there's a lot going on locally. We'd like to potentially be part of a working group at the Ecology Center where I wear a different hat than this one.
Yeah.
That's the hat I'm wearing in this commentary.
Awesome. Yeah, I should say, I feel like looking at across these different initiatives, sequestration is one where I think, as you say, there's already some outstanding work going on. And I think it's really, how do we scale it up? How do we fund it? How do we really support the efforts that are already underway? Whereas some of the other areas like building energy, that one seems much more daunting to me. They're all big projects to work on. But I think in sequestration, we do have some really excellent work already underway. So thank you for the connection to the Ecology Center. Yes, Fred.
Yes. Did you say that we were up 1% from 1990 to 2018?
Yes.
And so we're supposed to be 25% below 1990 by 2020. And I just wonder, if we're like in one of the most liberal places in the country or the world, and we're that far behind, I just wonder what this means for the tipping point. If we don't have enough money, are we moving too slow to make a difference?
That's a great question. And I guess I would also just want, and I didn't really highlight this number, but we are, Sonoma County in total, we are 13% below 1990. So if we look at ourselves from a larger perspective, not to say that it's not important what's happening in Sonoma, but overall we are seeing a decrease. And I think what we'd want to do for Sonoma is really look more closely at what might be driving those increases. What might be different in Sonoma around transportation that's making it more challenging for you to decrease your emissions? Are there unique situations? And I don't know enough about your travel patterns to be able to really comment on that, but it does, call out some areas that we might want to look at more closely, for sure.
So the county is 13% below 1990 compared to the 25% below goal.
Yes, yes. So we still have a long ways to go at the countywide. It's a big drop, as we see, in this. And I guess the concerning part for me in looking at this is that we saw this nice healthy decrease from 2010 to 2015, which was really the implementation of Sonoma Clean Power. So it shows you the power of finding a solution like that that really has a huge impact, and we really see that here. We saw a slight decrease 2015 to 2018, but it's like we'd achieved most of the reductions that we could achieve from the cleaner electricity. Not to say that it won't continue to get even cleaner, but this is where now we need to look at natural gas, for example. How do we transition away from natural gas to eliminate those emissions?
I just want to make a comment about the unincorporated county. I live on the east side of Sonoma, and I see perfectly serviceable houses get bought, torn down, and then build a giant house that's like 3 or 4 times as big for a couple. And so that seems to me that that's not headed in the right direction. So I don't know. Maybe we need more socialism for the the county planning department to not allow those kind of permits, because wealth is correlated with greenhouse gas emissions, and so the wealthier a person is, the higher their greenhouse gas emissions are. So I'm sure that the unincorporated county around Sonoma has some fairly substantial use. As GHG is correlated with wealth. But anyhow, you mentioned, reusing buildings and components, and I see buildings get torn down and taken to the dump. And so I see things out here on the east side as moving totally in the wrong direction.
And I just want to support that with regards to what Fred said. And if you looked at your statistics of the overall energy usage, Ross was the highest of all.
Oh, consumption, yeah.
Yes, in terms of consumption. So
yeah. There's definitely a correlation between income and consumption, for sure, and emissions.
And an additional point to make there is that the Climate Action 2020 unincorporated county inventory was kind of heavy on methane but it didn't seem to adequately account for the foothills housing around Sonoma. So I think some micro look at the building energy use in the unincorporated area around Sonoma that's in kind of the urban part of the valley rather than the ag part, then that's an area that should maybe be looked at for outsized energy use.
Yeah, and actually, if I could, I don't believe we have the data because of confidentiality requirements. We get like the data in a lump sum, like here's all the kilowatt hours and therms used in Sonoma, for example, or in the unincorporated county. But there is a new tool that's being developed that I don't know when it's going to be released, but I think it's fairly, in the near future at least, called the Energy Atlas, and it will allow you to see energy usage more by area. So exactly like what you're saying, you would be able to go and look at a map, and you could filter by type of building, whether it's residential or commercial, and you could actually start to see those energy use patterns. So when I find out when that tool is going to be released, I can certainly let Travis and Wendy know, because I'm sure that would be something that would be of interest to all of you to take a look at.
If the urban service area and the population within 5 miles of the Plaza was a city, it would be the 4th largest city in the county after Windsor. Just as a accident of fate, Sonoma is kind of a little island of a municipality, but the whole urban service area is legitimately a unified urban area, but it's not counted in the county inventory. That way. It's counted as unincorporated. So that would be a thing for Rcpa to look at is some way to analyze this area for what it really is,
Mm.
rather than by artificial political boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great input.
Tanya, I wanted to also thank you for a great presentation and just really thank our CPA for all that you do. We're so lucky to have you as a agency in our county. A couple of things. I always think it's interesting when we hear these reports and they talk about transportation, and I work for the county and I can get a cheap bus. I can get a free bus pass, which is cool, but you can get discounted SMART train, but we don't. I have to drive to Petaluma to get on the SMART train, so that doesn't really. I mean, I ride the SMART train for fun, but it doesn't do anything for me. So, but I'll tell you what has done something for me is the fact that I haven't left my house. I mean, I only go to work once a week, and so one thing with my leadership where I work and what I'm thinking about is this is an opportunity right now. The way we do business, I work with county parks, is what really can be retired at this time and what do we need to do to move forward. And so, Twitter has come out and said, no one ever has to return to work. Like they are going to just let people work at home forever. Mm-hmm. And so I want to know, how is our CPA looking at this time of COVID? It's a very dark, dark cloud, but there is a tiny silver lining with this work at home thing. So how are you taking leadership steps to think about working with business leaders to move forward to establish policies so workers can continue working to home? I mean, those figures you showed were amazing. Tell me what you're all doing about that.
We don't have anything, I would say, happening now, but you raise a great point in terms of the strategy that we're looking at, developing and rolling out. We haven't typically in the past worked with local businesses. We've really worked primarily with our partners like Sonoma Clean Power, Ag and Open Space, and then our jurisdictions. But that's not to say that we can't do that more in the future or be working with our jurisdictions to look at ways that they could be encouraging that shift within their own jurisdictions. So I think you point out a great opportunity. And I actually had a volunteer contact me, it's been about a month ago or so now, and she was interested in working on a project to work with local businesses to, establish telecommuting policies and finding ways to really make this COVID, what now is some people view as a temporary shift, make it longer term. So
I think you have a huge opportunity. The county itself is actually the largest employer in the county. Mm-hmm. And the policy for work at home is like a 1984 policy. Matter of fact, when it all started, they sent us this really hilarious email about you should dress up and, make sure you have no distractions, which none of this stuff works for COVID. I would really encourage our CPA to think big and think fast, because this is a little window of opportunity and we've already changed the behavior. So before we start falling back into these old patterns, how can we lock this in so we're not, moving forward? Yeah. The other thing is Travis, I don't know if you know, is working really hard to bring us up to speed on charging stations. We're sort of per capita kind of sad in Sonoma compared to giant municipalities such as St. Helena. I mean, that's like they're ahead of us. Yeah. So I just would really encourage you, as much as you can, help support Travis and he can support you with getting more charging stations. That's, I think, another really key component for Sonoma.
Mm-hmm. Great inputs. Thank you.
I had a comment, which is that I thank you, Tanya. It's an excellent report. It's great the way that you collect all this data. But I have, as we all do, just real COVID worries. And I commuted to work in a carpool for over 20 years, and I'm really worried that when things start to calm down, if for essential workers who can't work from home, the single occupancy driving is going to, if anything, is going to increase, because people are not going to want to get in somebody else's car. They're not going to want to get on public transportation. And I'm just wondering if there's anything SCTA can do to provide leadership going forward to encourage people to get back in, carpool, ride sharing, public transit. That's assuming that our public transit agencies and SMART even survive this, because of
they're really struggling. Yeah. Yeah, in fact, I was just we have a transit technical advisory committee that meets every month with the transit providers in the county as well as Golden Gate Transit. And so they were meeting this morning and giving an update on their ridership numbers, and they are still down pretty significantly, especially, and it probably won't be too surprising, Golden Gate Transit, their ferry service is down most significantly, which I think is all the former commuters that would go into the city using the ferry service. But yeah, they definitely were talking about the challenges, as well as some work that they're doing collectively as a region to develop really strong safety protocols and find ways to help folks feel safe using public transit. Because there is that, I think, very real concern that when people do have to go, those who are required to go back into an office or back to work, if they don't feel comfortable taking transit, they're going to be on the road in a car, and that's going to be really, the traffic could be even worse than it was before. So definitely a concern.
Okay, is there any other comments? So do we need to take action just to accept the report, or
No, there's no action needed because this report's been given and it's out there publicly available. The one thing you do have to ask for is public comments because it was an agenda item.
if so, is there any public comments on this agenda item, on this report?
Let me check. No, there is not.
The only other action would be to thank Tanya for an amazing job, and it sounded like everyone did, so I'm going to put in my amazing job. So
Thank you.
thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for the work that you're doing. It's very important.
I just like to, at this point in the agenda, I just want to just kind of go slow because the public comments, some people may want to comment and they may be, fussing with Zoom right now, trying to figure out how to get on. But I guess they had the opportunity during the entire presentation to Zoom if they wanted to make public comments.
Yes, I don't see any attendees other than staff, and there aren't any written comments.
Yeah. Okay. So if someone in the public was making a comment, they would be on it. They could get a screen on a Zoom. They would be on the Zoom just like the rest of us, right?
They would be noted in the attendee box, and I would allow them to speak if they raise their hands.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So thank you, Tanya. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
And now we'll move on to agenda item 5.3, consideration of a requirement for events at the Plaza and Depot Park for a simplified format for the emission of modes, for the estimation of modes of travel to allow the CSEC to calculate estimated GHG emissions. Now again, do we have is there someone here to make a report?
Yes, Lisa Jansen is with us.
Yes, she asked me to allow her to speak, and I did so. I see that her phone is muted, so she'll have to unmute herself.
Okay, so we're just waiting for Lisa to unmute herself.
It'd be nice to see her too.
Yeah.
She's showing up on the telephone there, but still muted.
When your picture's not there, you can kind of disappear for a while. So.
Yeah.
We'll find her. Just be patient here, just a moment.
Okay.
While we're waiting, I just will say that hopefully everyone has seen the announcement out about the CSEC vacancies, the regular, alternate, and youth representative. So I think that's good because the city was pretty overwhelmed dealing with stuff, and so that finally went out. I think about 10 days ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. So hopefully by next meeting, maybe we'll have a full complement.
Has anyone applied?
I don't know. That goes right to the city clerk, and I wouldn't necessarily ever know that until they're announced.
Travis, does the city clerk then send that directly to the high school?
The announcement went out, but I actually contacted Kelly O'Leary, and then Tony at Sonoma Ecology Center was interested, so I reached out to try to recruit for them. So yeah.
And how else was the announcement made? In the newspaper or social media?
I think it was on the newspaper and it's on the website.
Okay.
So feel free to spread the word.
I assume Wendy's calling Lisa. Oh, now Lisa, looks like Lisa's there. She's not muted anymore. Are you there, Lisa?
Her phone is muted.
Not anymore. Or at least her mic is not muted, but
Something is muted. It has the phone with a red line through it.
I'm on the phone with her and we're trying to figure this out. We're having some technical problems. Just stand by, please.
okay.
A summer joke while we're waiting.
Please proceed.
All right. What did the pig say at the beach on a hot summer's day?
What?
Do you know, Matt?
No.
I'm bacon.
So you want to hear a joke about construction?
Yes, let's hear it.
Sorry, I'm still working on it. Did you hear about this incredible, amazing new shovel? It's groundbreaking.
It's what?
Groundbreaking.
Well, a horse went into a bar and the bartender said, "Why the long face?"
I've got a nastier one if anybody wants to hear it.
Okay, so
Kimberly.
Better not.
Lisa's trying to call back in. So
Come on, Kimberly.
What do you call 6 weeks?
It's
I got a
little-
weather one. I'm afraid for Kimberly. I'm protecting her from herself.
Kimberly, you're the alcalde. You can do this.
This, of course, is being recorded forever.
I won't.
I'll call.
I'll tell you all
Can you hear
off
me?
phone.
Oh, I think.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. I'm working from the office and I don't have a computer that actually has a video option and it doesn't have a mic. So I call in on my cell phone and then watch you on my computer. So sometimes I have technical difficulties and I apologize.
So
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Great. I love the fact, David, that you just waved.
Yeah, there you
It
go.
allows me to, it lets me know that you can actually hear me, which is a good thing. So first of all, I just want to say good evening, commissioners, and I'm excited to be back. This is my first time back since the pandemic hit, so it's nice to see all of your smiling faces, and I'm excited to be here tonight. So quickly, this is an item which is a continuance of our earlier discussion regarding how to capture the attendee data from special event organizers to help calculate the estimated greenhouse gas emissions. I'm bringing back this mechanism, which is based on our earlier discussion in February regarding just very basic attendee data. So to clarify, this is a request of organizers to provide a best guess of number of attendees by locality or origin. the origins that we've identified is local Bay Area, other California, other US, international, and then for each of those items, they would provide a number, which again, we only have 2 events that actually can capture some data points because they actually have a registration system. So I just wanted to clarify that, you know, this is really, out of our large scale events, we have 2 that can give us some data points that might be actually factually accurate and we could actually use for evaluation, but we are going to make the request and see what type of information we get. We would be making this request as part of the post-event report, and for all large-scale events, this request would be made. I will continue to have my thoughtful dialogue and discussion with all event organizers on the front end, just trying to really identify additional pathways to reduce attendees getting into their car and driving to the event. So if it's updating their website with public transportation information, if it's having a bike valet on site, if it's, you know, providing other transportation options, if it's shared rides, etc. Working with if they actually have hotel blocks, working with the hotel to see if, you know, they can provide a walkable path or a walkable map to attend events, etc. So I'll continue down that path, but at this point, the thought is we would ask for the basic information. I would capture it in the post-event reports from all event organizers, and then I would present it to you in an annual staff report. After gathering this information for a year, then as the CSEC and as commissioners, you can then determine if the attendance data by origin is extensive enough to move forward with a greenhouse gas calculation. And then at this point, I'm not recommending that we make a formal policy change to the special events policy. We're going to make the request and see what type of information we get, and then give ourselves a year. And with COVID-19, at this point, I'm not anticipating events starting back up here in the Plaza until next year. We've canceled pretty much everything. Well, we have canceled everything through 2020. And at this point, I'm not actually taking applications for 2021. So we'll see what type of information is captured, and then we can kind of come back and have some thoughtful discussion regarding the information that is provided, and then determine our next steps as far as whether or not this is a policy change to the special events policy, or if the current practice of making the request of event organizers and just understanding that, you know, it's data points that we can't actually, what's the word I'm looking for, substantiate, because they don't capture any type of registration information on site. So at this point, I think it's staff is suggesting that we move forward with this very abbreviated plan. And I did include the Sonoma Plaza event GHG impact model draft, which was given to Destination or to Motive back in November of 2019 during their event review or approval. And I just want to make sure that you could see the complexity of the original request and kind of how we scaled it back to just basic data points. And so at this point, if you have any questions or would like to see additions or changes made, I am here to answer them and work with you on this. How about Fred? Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I just wanted to say if David Morell's happy, then I'm happy.
Okay, David.
Okay, it's my turn. I wanted to start by saying that I'm so pleased that we've made this progress, that we've had some forward progress on this potentially important and obviously controversial matter. I'm pleased that we've made progress. I'm a little disappointed in a couple of the elements, Lisa. I would think that I would like to have reporting more often than annually. I'm getting too old to wait for annual reports. You just never know. So I think we should have reports whenever we have the reports that you do of the post-event, and maybe quarterly summary reports. This, of course, requires that we have events on the plaza. It's a bit moot otherwise, obviously, but it's, again, a good step forward from where we were. Secondly, I would recommend that we do make a change to the special events policy as part of incorporating this movement forward for all to recognize that it is movement forward, though small. I'm not worried about the fact that the data aren't perfect. It's still not fake news from my point of view. It's estimates, and we knew all along that's what we'd have. So I would rather have changes to the special events policy as my personal, almost happy, Fred, recommendation for this. We do have a climate emergency resolution passed in Sonoma, and that pushes us forward, not to just say we're going to report it annually and not change the policy. So that's an applause with a concern.
So David, I think the thought is let's capture the data, let's analyze the data before we make a policy decision, because if we need more data points or if we need to make changes, then we'd have to make a policy change twice. So that was kind of my discussion with the city manager on this, was let's take our steps to get to the point where we really know what type of policy we want to include in our special events policy.
I'm not surprised to hear that, Lisa. But again, what we're doing is sending signals to people, to event organizers, to those who read policies, to those who interact with city managers. We're sending messages. And so I would recommend personally that we not wait, and we do make two changes. It's not that hard to make changes. It's sending important messages that we're in a climate emergency. We need to get off our duffs wherever we can to do something better, even if it's small increments. We saw the numbers tonight that are a little concerning, especially on transportation.
Okay, David, I hear you, and I can take that back. I just, I think staff were wearing a lot of hats, and with the fact that events aren't even scheduled to occur anytime in the near future, I don't know from a timing perspective how soon I could get this to city council. So
I appreciate all you're doing and would just encourage it to move with all due acceleration. I'm watching Travis's face.
How about Matt?
Yeah, so thank you, Lisa. I do appreciate all you're doing. I just wanted to make just have some discussion about, transportation is the big area here, and the fact that we don't have any data except for, one or two events like the destination races where they register in advance. I've been to events and I've seen this, and I'm wondering if a solution might be to have some volunteers or staff, or maybe like the high school students, the enviro leaders, who could gather data during events. In other words, walking around with a clipboard, asking participants, a 30-second, questionnaire: where do you live? How'd you get here? And also, those people could be, they could really have two purposes. Number one would be to acquire some of that data, and number two is to educate the public. There's a lot of things that we really don't know about these events. We don't know how many people at events drove when they didn't realize how close their hotel was, that they could have walked or bicycled. We don't know that. I suspect at some of these events, when I see cars circling looking for a parking place, that they could be people who were actually coming from close enough that they could have walked or bicycled, and they didn't even know that their hotel, that the resort fee they paid in the hotel provided them for a free bicycle rental. That we need to. So I just wondering that that's a solution to this problem is having people who would walk around at the events, gather this data, and provide public education on how they can get to the event without having to drive, and it, you know, would have the benefit of reducing the traffic and parking hassles around the plaza. So that's just my suggestion.
It's noted. Hi, Kimberly.
Hi, Lisa. How are you? I just had a question. I know that the City Council approved the closing of First Street East between Napa and Spain. And I'm wondering, is there any data going to be collected for that, or is that considered off the town plaza?
So Kimberly, at this point, no, there's no data being captured. Just again, city staff is so strapped. We are scrambling to pull this together. You'll see me out there and one other person. We are trying to bootstrap a lot of things right now to get these businesses open. And honestly, trying to further complicate it is not even, I wish it was an option, but I'm trying to make signs just to get people parked in the right location and get information out to the business and get encroachment permits collected and insurance and you know, we've had a runway of a week and a half. So I apologize. We're all really tapped right now.
I think we all understand how tough that is. I mean, I realized, you know, just even the concern about masks. The other day I walked on the bike trail and was counting everybody, and a quarter of the people, even with all the signs, even with all the everything, a quarter of the people were not wearing masks.
Yes, the city is still very much operating in emergency operations mode. We are still addressing all of the COVID-19 pandemic items, and it's not business as normal. I mean, we are scrambling. So we're trying our best, we're doing new things, and we're moving projects forward. It's just, you know, I wish I had a longer runway to initiate all of these thoughtful ideas. I'm not getting it right now.
This is a predicate for what's coming with budget cuts, with TOT shrinking and so on. We've only begun to see the squeeze on city capacity and county capacity and state capacity as we move ahead with the economic impacts of the failures to manage the China virus.
Yes. Any other comments?
Once again, thank you for taking this as far as you have, Lisa, from the one that Fred wanted to hear from.
So at this point, I will take my notes back to the city manager. Again, just knowing what the priorities are and our key action items that we're trying to move forward just immediately. I don't have a timeline for you, so I will try to get you a timeline and next steps.
Do we need any kind of resolution from the CSEC, or are we just having a conversation with the city's representative?
If you look in the agenda, the recommended action is that the CSEC supports staff's data collection process by a request of event organizers to provide the best estimate of attendee data broken down by origin as possible, as outlined in the attached post-event attendee summary as part of the post-event review process. And the city staff will compile the data and present a report to the CSEC annually.
If appropriate, I would want to amend that they would provide information as available and annually in a summary form. So we don't have to wait a whole year to start getting info.
So is that
Okay.
David? Would anybody like to make a motion?
I'm trying to do it and look at the screen at the same time, and it's over here. So I'm going to move that we accept the recommended data collection process by a request of event organizers, and we get a report as is available and annually.
I would second Sandy's motion.
Any discussion on that motion? Hearing no discussion, should we call for a vote on the motion?
Don't we need to open it up for public comments, right?
First, we need to thank you for the reminder, Travis. Is there any public comments on the motion? Or on this, any public comments on this agenda item?
I'm checking.
Any public people?
No, Chair Metzler, there's no public comment.
So hearing no public comments are closed. So do we, is there any further discussion on the motion? Hearing no discussion.
Okay.
A roll call vote on the motion.
Okay, Commissioner Alaba,
Aye, mates.
Commissioner Blattner,
Aye.
Commissioner Funky,
Yes.
Commissioner Morrell,
Aye, aye.
Commissioner Metzler.
Aye.
Okay, it passes unanimously.
You want us to wait for you?
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa.
Okay, now it's time for commission members' reports and comments. Does anybody have any reports or comments? Go ahead, Sandy.
Why am I the only one that doesn't?
I just want to note that there are new, Travis, did you create the new charging stations behind the B of A bank? Was that you? Travis, is it all you? Did you build them?
Yeah, he just.
That was VW because they got caught cheating. So that's part of Dieselgate.
We'll take their money. Congratulations, Travis. You built it. You made it. It's all you. I saw you out there. Good job. I think it looks like there's like 6 or 8. I don't know. It's bigger than any of the other ones. So
there's actually, there's actually 4, and they should be online. I think September is what I heard.
I couldn't add it up because there's so many plugs. It's like
there's multiple plugs. Yeah, there's actually 4.
Plugs, like 8. I don't know how that all worked. Maybe you pile the cars up, but good job. Good job.
Oh, doesn't do anything, but thank you.
Nice job. Nice work there, Travis. It's all you. And then just letting folks know, just from the countywide, I really appreciate your comments, David, just to give you a window into the county for a minute. Many of my staff members are actually not working for parks right now. They have been pulled to the Emergency Operations Center, which opened in March and is not closed. So significant portions of certain divisions are not even really working for us most days of the week. So that's kind of how all that works. And on the other hand, parks, I mean, it's kind of all these things we've always dreamed of. Everyone's working at home. The beach parks are full every day by 10. The river parks, every day is Saturday. Everyone is outside. So it's a strange time. I always wanted people to love parks, and they sure do right now. And the latest count on masks at Sonoma Valley Regional, when I was there with Rebecca Hermosillo, was 95% use. So that was exciting. And also, if you know Rebecca Hermosillo, who's one of our Latino leaders in the community, read the article about her. She's on the cover of the North Bay Business Journal. It's a great article. Or just check out my Facebook post because I forwarded it. That's my report.
David?
Yeah, a couple of points. I'm picking up on Sandy on parks. I would note that Sugarloaf Park Campground now opened, and it's been running full even during the week, first time ever. So we're really pleased about that. It's another park available, and people are appreciating it. A special note tonight of thanks to Tom Conlon and special wishes. Tom's father-in-law has been reported to have contacted the virus, and we're thinking of him. And so I would send, whether this is official or unofficial, I don't know, but my best wishes to Tom Conlon's father-in-law with the horrible coronavirus. I would note that we have a new project at the Ecology Center funded by the North Coast Regional Partnership, taking mobile kilns into forests where we're turning forest slash into biochar. This project will include work with Potter Valley Tribe, as well as with the Redwood Forest Foundation in Mendocino. And we will then have those kilns available so that things like the cuttings that were done on the plaza today by Bartlett when I drove by could be turned into biochar, some of that forest waste, instead of chipped and sent to landfill. And finally, I would note that Travis, and working with Travis and the city, we have a project proposal for federal funding on some special issues of composting and biochar, and we're due to hear by August 31st, so fingers are crossed. You'll hear at the next monthly meeting.
Thanks, David. Any other comments? Yes, Fred.
I have something that I maybe want to put on a future agenda, is that I noticed on the city's description of the CSEC mission that it didn't have anything to say about environmental climate policy. So I would like to make an agenda item that we change our mission statement or the description of what the CSEC does to include the work that we're doing on climate, because I think that's an important part of the commission here. And we've been trying to move away from events, and the city's hired Lisa. And so I think that would be a nice addition, and it might get more people interested in the commission. So just an agenda item, and then if we decide to agendize that and then make a recommendation to the council, then that would broaden the, it would actually state what we're actually doing at the CSEC, which the mission doesn't state now.
So to get something on the agenda, doesn't somebody have to make a motion?
That's correct, and second and then voted yes or no on it. Yeah.
You want to restate your motion, Fred?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we agendize a discussion on the description and mission of the CSEC to include climate policy.
And Kimberly, you're muted. Did you
I second it.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Is there any discussion on this motion? I would just like to say one thing, which is the motion, as I understand it, is to discuss this. We will once it gets on the agenda, then we will decide what it is, what action we want to recommend to take. So we're not taking action. We're just going to discuss, agendizing something to discuss at a future meeting.
Right, but I would suggest that, Fred, if you want to have a good discussion, that you come with a change in terms of the mission statement of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty simple. Just, if you look at the description of, they describe to members of the public what being on the CSEC might be, just put city climate policy on there too.
Okay, so we better halt it there. We can do the action and detailed discussion at the next meeting if this passes.
Okay, so hearing no more discussion, roll call vote on the motion, on Fred's motion.
Out there already?
Okay. Commissioner Alabak,
Aye.
Commissioner Blattner,
Aye.
Commissioner Funky, you're muted, Sandy. Oh. Okay. Commissioner Morrell,
Aye.
Commissioner Metzler,
In only 16 years, I'll be 80 years old, and then I'll be able to say, aye, matey.
Good man.
okay, the item is agendized.
Okay, I have two comments I'd like to make, which is I wanted to again thank you, Travis, for your single-handedly getting those EV charging stations. I'm just wondering if the city needs to look at the city, you know, the municipal code, and if there's any ordinances that need to be changed or refined, or just talking to the police department about enforcement of parking in those spaces. Because once we're back to busy summer weekends and events next year, if there is no parking, people will park illegally who are not charging on the parking stations. And also, as the owner of both an electric vehicle and a plug-in hybrid, there are issues with enforcing people when there's no parking available. People.
I think, I don't know where they're at. They're underneath, have him find them, or downstairs somewhere.
Oops. Matt,
Did you hear what I said? I don't know where we're at here.
I heard the illegal parking. As an owner of a high plug-in hybrid and EV, that's where I ended.
People there, I just wondering, there's just issues there about enforcement of parking. Does the police know that they need to enforce that just like they would enforce handicap parking spaces? And, you know, there are 2 spaces already, but it's going to be, those are going to be more visible. And so just with 4 spaces there, we need to make sure that the necessary ordinances are in place for the police to enforce parking of the spaces there, of the EV charging spaces.
I'll have to look into that because that is on private property. So that's one thing that's,
The whole thing is,
I'm guessing the bank has to enforce the parking problems in their parking lot. There's a sign about towing and stuff when I've been there, because that's a bank I use, so I'm not parking illegally. But I see a sign about towing and who to call if you get towed.
my other comment I just wanted to say is that I just got back from 6 days of backpacking the Ansel Adams Wilderness, 9,000 feet elevation in the High Sierra, and it is scary. The creeks are completely dry. Climate change is here. It is real. It is now. It is late September conditions. It really looks. I have never seen it that dry in the mountains. And so, you know, I just think we all need, just want everybody to remind everybody that we need to focus on climate change. It is real, it is here, it is now. It's not just down the road. Yeah, Sandy.
Sorry, I didn't realize this is where we can try to agendize things. If Travis, if you're not going to give us an update today, I'd really like to get an update next time on the garbage can and recycling project. I know the city is very busy with other things, but this has been going on, I don't even know now, 24 months. We've had Measure M funds for 18 months.
Yeah.
I would like us to hear about it, please.
I'm going to do that right after. That's the next agenda item. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other members' reports or comments? Okay, now agenda item number 7, staff comments and announcements. 7.1, sustainability coordinator update. That's you, Travis.
Great, thank you. So that's a great lead-in. At the last meeting, Commissioner Funke requested a staff update on the status of Measure M funds for Plaza improvements. And here's the update. The city budgeted for receiving $95,000 of Parks Measure M funds in fiscal year 2021. $35,000 of that is budgeted for a basic level of maintenance and management of the Montini Preserve Sonoma Outlook Trail by the Sonoma Ecology Center under an annual contract with the city. This work is eligible for the Parks Measure M funds because these funds became available the same year that the city became responsible for funding maintenance of the Montini Preserve. The Sonoma County Agricultural Preservation Open Space District provided maintenance funding during the first several years after the city took on ownership of the preserve. 60,000 of that 95,000 is budgeted for capital improvement program CIP project P-1, which is Plaza and Depot Parks enhancement and the connectivity project. Now the proposed public trash and recycling receptacles and the water bottle filling station are being funded under Proposition 68, California Parks, Environment, and Water Bond. The city has placed these projects on hold due to the economic uncertainties and revenue shortfalls this year related to the pandemic and shelter-in-place orders. There is an extended timeline for the use of the Proposition 68 funds. The city will have until December 31st, 2021 to submit the project scope application. After that, the deadline for expenditure of funds and completion of the project is June 30th, 2024. So the next item, and if there's comments or questions on each one of these, I can address those. Okay. The next one, yes.
I was under the impression that garbage containers had already been ordered. Is the order now on hold?
That is correct. They have not been ordered. What the last I knew is that we had sort of model ones that they were testing out at the corporation yard. They had not been ordered. And it's actually a more complex project because there's concrete pads that need to be installed, and the whole water bottle filling station was an issue because there was no place for the water, so they had to. I'm not getting this all correctly. This is not my project, but they had to put the return into the wastewater pipe. So it was much more detailed than originally envisioned. And this was going on progress, and then COVID hit, and then it pulled staff away from the project planning of that. Again, the good news is the funds will be there as soon as we get out of this, then we can move forward on that. But the designs are there, the locations, the signage has all been designed and planned. But as far as I know, that nothing has been ordered beyond the model containers. Okay, so the next issue, staff has been focusing on the solar battery storage backup project at the police station. We recently learned that the initially identified funding source will not be accessible because of insufficient power consumption at the police station. However, Sonoma Clean Power is overseeing a project looking at a solar battery storage backup feasibility analysis that will hopefully help identify other funding opportunities. So in other words, that initial funding source is not going to work, but meanwhile, this other project is going on with a consultant that's been hired by Sonoma Clean Power to look at other opportunities, but it's based on a detailed consumption as well as tied into PSPS events. A solar battery storage system would further reduce greenhouse gas emissions because it would allow for the consumption of stored energy during times of insufficient or no solar powered production at night and when it's rainy and cloudy. It also would be a backup, but it also would reduce the energy costs and obviously greenhouse gases. So staff has also been focusing on the siting of EV stations. We were not able to put forth an application for rebate under the Cal-E VIP program administered by Sonoma Clean Power for new EV stations due to multiple factors, but primarily to the high cost. I'm going to talk about that. So state law requires that 4 or fewer charging ports, so you can have a station with up to 2 ports, requires a spot that is van accessible, and 5 or more charging ports also requires a full ADA compliant spot suitable for charging. And you cannot take a designated handicap parking spot and give it up to the EV. So this has to be a net increase. At all 3 of the public parking areas that were assessed, upgrading of electric panels, cost to supply electricity, the construction of the concrete pads, and the pads to actually hold the charging stations, as well as compliant parking spots, all the costs of the chargers all greatly exceeded the allowable maximum reimbursement. So the rebate program would give the city up to $5,000 per charge port. This would probably be maybe 20 to 30% of the total cost. So staff is continuing to reaching out to private landowners and to a local nonprofit as potential hosts. One of the realities is that most of the existing structures in these parking areas are just not, they're actually terrible if you want to then add EV charging from an electrical supply perspective. Going forward, we're thinking about how you design this. There is some other potential funding opportunities. There's some things that we need to move forward and work with the Chamber of Commerce to reassess how we're going to do this. And the Cal-E VIP program, just as an aside, I think there was for the level 2, which is, think about that as like the 4-hour charge. I believe they allotted about 1.6 million for Sonoma County and part of Mendocino, and they received $3.6 million in requests within a matter of days. So it certainly surpassed everyone's expectations. At the next fiscal year, there is additional funding. It's a little bit less. We definitely will hopefully be on track to secure that funding. We just need some time. And I will say, as an explanation, not as an excuse, the original date was October. That's the date we were working on, and they moved it up to July 8th, which caught a number of people by surprise. But we need to figure out how to move forward on this. I think we all know how important it is. I have been in contact. I don't know that rebate program was available to any entity. It wasn't the government, just the government, but it was nonprofits, multifamily units, businesses, and so forth. I have not gotten a geographic breakdown. They said they were going to get that to me as soon as possible, just so we know how many of them are in the city, because it doesn't matter where they are. We just need them as much as possible. Any questions about that? Hmm? Oh, you're muted. Oh, muted.
Andy?
You're muted, Sandy.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like, Travis, you're talking about 15,000 per port if you were going to able to get 5,000, and that's only about a third of the cost.
Mm-hmm.
So
Correct, yeah.
to get 4 ports is about $60,000. To me, that doesn't seem like a huge infrastructure project for the city. So is this really, I mean, how can we just get this into the city budget as an infrastructure project, I guess is my question, because it seems kind of silly to like, I mean, I know I've written grants for $5,000 and $20,000, and it's not a big piece of pie, you know? So like, what can we do to just get it in our budget to just budget for some of this stuff as a city?
That's not my particular area. That's certainly the city council. And one of the issues is obviously the budget situation that we are in. And I also want to emphasize it's not a grant, it's a rebate. So that was one of the challenges, is that we would have to come up with the money and it would come later on. So that was one of the issues.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think that if this conversation is going to continue, we should agendize it for a future meeting.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Sorry. So if someone wanted to do that, they could make a motion.
I would like to make a motion that that we put an agenda item on the next agenda to discuss requesting the city allocation of funds for EV charging stations.
I think I second that.
So I guess I'll restate my motion, since I'm not sure if I heard it. I'd like to make a motion that we put an agenda item for next month to discuss city funding for EV charging stations.
I do second that.
Any discussion? So we have a motion, roll call motion, vote on the motion.
Okay, Commissioner Alabak,
Aye.
Commissioner Blattner,
Aye.
Commissioner Funke,
Aye.
Commissioner Morell,
Aye.
and Commissioner Metzler.
Aye.
Okay. Okay, so moving on, briefly, staff is currently drafting an outline of a discussion document to help guide the initial efforts of the Joint Climate Action Subcommittee, which has not been finalized or has not been finalized yet at the City Council. And that's designed to meet the mandate of the recently adopted climate emergency resolutions requirement for city operations to be carbon neutral by 2030. The carbon sequestration offset project, which was part of the City Council approved work plan, has not progressed. Two regional nonprofits were contacted. Both organizations were intrigued, but there was insufficient interest to continue on this particular path. So one approach is to combine the carbon offset idea with the other City Council approved climate action efforts, which is to support the creation of a local nonprofit focusing on creating bike and pedestrian trails. So I'll be bringing forth a formal action in an upcoming meeting, trying to combine these two to see if to present this, looking at the carbon sequestration offset project, along with the other work plan item about support the creation of a local nonprofit focusing on creating bike and pedestrian trails. And finally, copy for the soon to be modified updated City Sustainable webpage has been drafted, and the drafted pages are being constructed. Hopefully it can be shared with the CSE at its next meeting. And that concludes my report update.
Travis, do we have a special events coordinator update?
I don't see Lisa on the line or on the Zoom anymore. Travis, do you know if she had any updates?
No, I think it's fair to say that there are no events because of COVID. So I think we could just surmise that there's no updates for that. And I think she did discuss that in her presentation about that. So.
Okay, anything else? Okay, well, we'll see you all. The next meeting will be on September 9th. Unless there's any other comments, meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See everybody.
Bye.
Stay safe.